Hey guys, Carter here with Patriot Training Center. Today I'm going to talk to you about the top 5 mistakes I see with AR manufacturing. The number one thing that I see is just an overall QC problem. So the thing that sets apart your expensive ARs versus your budget ARs is QC. So quality control. You have to mass produce something to make it cheap, you're going to have to give up some of the quality control because that takes time and effort. And it also takes a lot of money to pay employees to sit there and actually QC stuff. Now, this can become a problem when you start going into high round count stuff like when you start getting into the thousands of rounds. The reason that companies have been able to get away with not doing QC for so long is because the average gun actually doesn't get shot more than 50 rounds in its lifetime. You go buy it, you put a box of ammo through it, put it in the safe, it sits there. So they've been able to get away with this for far too long. And one thing that I will say is they have made the AR-15 accessible to almost everyone, which I think is a good thing. But when we're looking at what makes a good rifle, you might not see the differences on the shelf when you're at the gun shop, but if you take it apart, you start gauging and looking at things, you're going to see the differences in why something costs $500, why something costs $1,000, why something costs $2,000, $3,000, so on and so forth. There becomes a point of diminishing returns where the gun is just expensive just because, but there are companies who do a lot of quality control on their stuff. But the main thing, the number one thing I see is just people skipping out on QC and not spending the time to do that. That means checking different parts for different tolerances, making sure that everything coming off the machine is actually the spec that it should be. And then when those parts start playing together and they're out of spec, then you are going to have problems when you start getting into high round counts. Number 2 is improper materials. So this is a big one because that is a huge way that they cut cost on these lower budget rifles is by using cheaper materials. The problem with that is you're using cheaper materials. So the more that you shoot your gun, the more risk that you're running for something breaking on it. There is a specific spec that guns should be built at and different metallurgy that it was designed to be. And the more that you go away from that to try and cheapen it, you can run into a lot of issues. There are some things that you can go cheaper on, but things that I'll see people. So this is a Colt M4 carbine 6920. This is something that you see a lot of manufacturers in the budget. They use crappy materials on the bolt carrier group, which in my opinion is the worst place to do it at because this is an integral part of the gun. It's very, very important. If the tolerances aren't perfect on the bolt carrier group, then you're going to have issues like you're going out of style. So this is a part that you don't skip on. You use the right materials and you make sure that you have the right QC on these bolt carrier groups. This is a huge failure point in the gun, and most of the companies that are making super cheap ARs are not using proper material on this, and they're not using the correct processes when they're building these. So on that, number 3 is improper torque specs. So when you're building an AR, you torque things down to their specific values that's mil spec. When I get a lot of these budget guns in here when I'm working on them, I'll see castle nuts, which is this part, they're not staked and torqued down the right way. Like you can just undo them with your hand. And that's a problem because you want stuff staked down and tightened to the correct torque spec. I'll even see things like the gas key on the bolt carrier group right here. If that's not staked down and torqued to the proper spec, that can come loose and you're going to have all sorts of leakage and you're going to have issues with your gun cycling. So not having the correct bolt carrier group, having that torqued down and staked on your gas key, things like not staking your castle nut, not torquing down your barrel to the correct spec, those are the things that you're paying for when you buy a nicer rifle. Is a lot of times if you're the right company and they're not just charging a lot to charge a lot, they're putting the time and effort in to gauge everything, torque everything, to get that thing to run. These cheaper manufacturers do not have the time or the budget to do that, and so that's what you're paying for. You're paying for a rifle that's actually going to run when they say it's going to run. Number 4 is mil-spec tolerances. So a lot of these people, they say, oh, our gun is mil-spec. And a mil-spec, when you start talking about tolerances, there's a range. There's a plus range and a minus range. So they'll say it's plus or minus 10 thousandths or whatever. But when you start piecing different parts together that aren't meant to go together and you don't gauge them to make sure that they fit properly, you can get plus or minus 10 thousandths on one side and plus or minus 10 thousandths on the other, and now you have a part that doesn't fit and it doesn't work well together with that part. That's some of the things that I see when you're starting to talk about people just throwing ARs together in their basement. A lot of times you can't control the QC, and if you don't have the right gauges, you can be putting guns together that just don't, the parts could be too high quality parts, but their tolerances are on one end of the mil spec and the other part is on the other end of the mil spec. So they just aren't designed to go together. So you'll see a lot of home builders do that, but even some of these low-end manufacturers will get parts from everywhere and slap them together, slap their name on it, and then you have a gun that is just all sorts of Frankenstein together that the parts aren't actually designed to run with that gun. Number 5 is cutting the cost on the wrong parts. When you're building an AR, there's some things that you can give up as far as cost goes to get the cost down, but not suffer in performance. So like this Colt AR is a great example of that. So these Colts have a name for themselves of being pretty good. They have decent reliability. This one I've gauged out, and actually the bolt carrier group isn't great tolerance, but for the most part, they actually do QC these things and do a decent job. But as you can see here, furniture doesn't have any effect on whether this gun will run or not. So they did put cheaper furniture. You have the plastic grip, you have the cheapo stock, and the cheapo handguard forend, whatever you want to call it. It's a cheaper setup. But what they didn't do was they didn't go out and put the cheapest bolt carrier group that they could in it. They didn't put the cheapest barrel that they could put into it. Those are the most important components when you're building an AR. Now, I always think of it, I think of it like the barrel and the bolt carrier group and your buffer system, which is right here. Those are the most important parts of your gun. That is what you can control your gun running on, or that is what determines how your gun runs. It's not what forend you have on it. It's not even what lower receiver you have on it. It's really not even what trigger you have on it, as long as the trigger is working. So a lot of people put a lot of money into things like triggers. They put super expensive furniture on it, but they're putting crap in their bolt carrier group and their barrels, and they're using super bad materials. So that is a big thing with building guns, and why you might think that you're getting a gun that's good, but it could suck. So cutting costs in the components that are actually important and using parts that are flashy and catch people's eye to get them to buy your guns is a big issue that I see. They'll put all this different Magpul furniture and whatever, and make it nice and sexy, but the internals are still garbage. So make sure that you're looking out for that and start studying what kind of components people are putting in guns. And one thing that Mike Mahalski over at Sons of Liberty Gunworks says that I always laugh at is, look what's in their product description. If they're not telling you, there's probably a reason why they're not telling you. Or they just don't know. So there's a lot of people putting guns together that just aren't aware and they don't know. This isn't a video to rag on anyone. I just want you guys to make the most out of your AR platform and know what you're getting before you go spend a bunch of money on something. So if you found this video helpful, go ahead and like, comment, and subscribe. I'll catch you guys in the next one.